So then we are back with the more understanding from the time of the second tabernacle services that we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet, the great prophet of Israel that was then slain because the people of his time did not understand Yeshayahu the prophet, and he was speaking on behalf of Tabernacle, on behalf of the Creator, on behalf of the Messiah, on behalf of Ruach HaKodesh. Yet, during the time where he was speaking and recording these holy instructions, his people then did not understand, and they slain him for no reason. He was sawn in half. Even the Messiah himself, as the great prophet, above Moshe, above Yeshayahu and the great prophets, the Messiah, the great prophet, promised by the Creator himself, explaining when this promised and favored one then comes, you must listen to him. And the Messiah made a reference of Yeshayahu the prophet being one of the greatest prophets, mentioned then the hardship that he went through because of the ignorance of the people of his time. The Messiah obviously felt and he experienced then the hardship of the ignorance of his own people also during his time. So then the world at the moment, as it is transitioning from the time of the seat ended in 09. Then we are during the time of the dragon. Then we find tabernacling also facing the same hardships that the Messiah then was facing during the time of his transition, of then transitioning from the first tabernacle service, first menorah, to the second tabernacle services. The Messiah came and he continued with the work of Leviticus of 23rd chapter, where you find then the spring feast's completion from the first verse until the 21st verse. There you find then the exact understanding of the spring feast. The nation of Israel maintained these spring feasts for more than 1,000 years, training for the coming of the Messiah, because when the Messiah would come, he would then complete every section of the spring feast's training, and then people would understand. The Messiah would come and complete precisely on time 490 days of ministry, and then would usher in his tabernacling. The Messiah was the favored. The Messiah was then the promised Messiah, and he obviously completed precisely the spring feast. But then the Messiah had to take tabernacling out of Jerusalem. That's the reason, for instance, the Messiah then went to Mount Gerizim. It was required for the Messiah to come out of Jerusalem as the living, walking, mobile tabernacling, and he went up on the mountain of Gerizim, Mount of Favor. There he transfigured himself. Precisely there then Moshe and Eliyahu, they show up to the Messiah and they gave their okay thus far, because up to the point where the Messiah was founded then on Mount Gerizim, every detail of the holy instructions related with the spring feast were then completed. Then the Messiah transfigured himself. It was during the time of tabernacling. Messiah was tabernacling with his people. It was the feast of Sukkah, the holy Mikra of Sukkah. Time that the people would then set up their tents once a year, and they would obviously remind themselves of the presence of the coming of the Messiah, and precisely during this time then the Messiah was sukkahing with them, or tabernacling with them. So then when the Messiah then started to open the seals, that's where we get our understanding, where then we find the vengeance. The world is preparing for the vengeance only. Whatsoever else is before vengeance must be completed, because the only section left of completion is the autumn feast. That's why the Messiah said in the 24th chapter of Michichiahu, the first recording of the spring feast, was mentioned very clearly what is going to be then the end of the world. The Messiah, when he was explaining and he was gathered with his people, with his disciples, with his chosen ones, later they became the sent ones, he said very precisely, and the people were aware of, because the Messiah had taught them up to the moment the only section left was vengeance. It was the end of the world. So the Messiah explained the holy instructions so clearly. Every time his people would speak while they were gathering, they knew for sure the next step is, the next objective is only the completion of the autumn feast. This means the seals had to be opened. So then the Messiah went to Mount Gerizim, he went on the top, and he opened the seals. Then, obviously, those situations related with the opening of the seals, they were around and they are around for more than a couple thousand years, including the first 1,000 years of the Messiah and 1,000 years of Nahashatan. The only section left of the holy instructions at the moment related with the autumn feast are those on Galah or Revelation, where you then read the sounding of the shofars and then the extension where the pouring of the cups are at. Those, they complement each other. Those are related with the autumn feast. The Messiah is coming in autumn per then the instructions, per the times and seasons on the land of Israel. Precisely as the Messiah had stated and the prophets had indicated, and then the holy instructions also taught them. So then we find ourselves then as Gentiles understanding tabernacling. We only spoke of tabernacling at the moment. There was not an indication of Gentiles, only tabernacling. This is absolutely the very basics of the basics of understanding of tabernacling. So then, we have to include ourselves then as Gentiles, because we must know the holy instructions, we must know the layerings of the holy instructions, because the Gentiles saved in the Messiah, they must testify. Testify meaning then explaining the holy instructions layered, without functioning in Ruach HaKodesh. Functioning in Ruach HaKodesh is exclusively for the Hebrews doing their work in the holy cities. They are the people involved with the functionings, the miraculous presence of Ruach HaKodesh in 7 spirits of Elohim, 7 functions. They are the functioned people. Gentiles saved in the Messiah, they have the obligation. Try to understand, it's not optional. Those who are saved in the Messiah, they are obligated then testify on behalf of the Messiah. This truly is the condition of those Gentiles saved in the Messiah. They must produce fruit. So then, we find then the obligations of the Hebrew people, functioning and pruning. What kind of a pruning? Zechariah mentioned of pruning. What does it mean? Hebrews then from the holy cities, and the first holy city is on the land of Cush, northern Sudan, per the instructions of the prophet Yeshayahu chapter 1:8. Then you find the first holy city. Then later those 7 cities in Asia Minor must be refurbished. From those cities then comes vengeance. 7 cities, 7 shofars, 7 cups, a sound of shofar per city. Then we understand those cities must be refurbished. And the other cities, as many as Ruach HaKodesh, must inform and must yet build. So then, we find ourselves understanding tabernacling. Comes then the understanding of testifiers. The 6th chapter of Galah gives you a hint of those people testifying on behalf of the Messiah. The Hebrews, the functional ones, they will to do pruning in Jerusalem. The objective of the Hebrews is making sure at the end Jerusalem then is saved. What does it mean? The people, the Hebrews in Jerusalem, they are then enlightened. Then the blind section of the scripture related with the Hebrews would be then eliminated. At the moment, Israel, unfortunately, is yet blind of the fact of the Messiah, or the many layerings of the holy instructions. The Messiah said not a layer of understanding is going to be left undone. So then, the people of Jerusalem, they will to receive help from those Hebrews of the holy cities, making route the holy cities up to Jerusalem to do training, to do the pruning. Thus Zechariah. Then you find as the Hebrews they are en route going up to Jerusalem, then Gentiles they try to get a hold of the garment of the Hebrews. And they say, please teach us. We know because the Creator Yahweh is with you. And He is doing the work of pruning in Jerusalem. But we want you to teach us. They won't teach them. It's not their function of teaching others. Their section, their obligation of teaching is already done, completed. They are only functioning. The testifiers, the Gentiles, they have the obligation of then doing the galaying, the revealing, the unveiling of the layers of understanding of the holy instructions. This truly is the obligation of every Gentile saved in the Messiah. So each has his or his own objective. Speaking of Gentiles testifying, or then Hebrews functioning. So then we find ourselves during this time reading the holy instructions, chapter 1:8. Then you find Yeshayahu speaking of the holy city. Then you find even the Gentiles then were included. When you understand tabernacling from the land of Israel, you understand then the city of Jerusalem should be secluded, and it was not. Most of the time it was not. However, then the perimeter of the holy city and the land and farming were always directed by Hebrews. You don't find at any point, anyway, you find then Gentiles leading the service area of Israel. Do you? No, it's always led by Hebrews themselves. But this time, the Creator has indicated even the Gentiles are then taking on themselves then the obligation of working the land, indicating participation during the time of the restoration period. But they have the obligation of taking care of tabernacling, but from the view of testifying. And there are those, as per instructions also, that will take care of the service area of the holy cities, providing then the city, the seclusion, with the best of the land so they can do their work. So then we find ourselves during this time aligning ourselves with the holy instructions. So then you find tabernacling, you find the holy people obviously resuming their services. We find Gentiles included testifying, and also the Gentiles included in the plan of restoration. Then you find obviously Daniel the prophet. Daniel spoke of the time of the deceit, and at the end of the time of deceit, then a peak of knowledge from the viewpoint of a tradesperson indicates none other than trade via computer. You have to understand high knowledge Then you find trade. Trade, Daniel was a tradesperson. He was making deals for the king or the kings of whom he was working under. So then we find ourselves during this time understanding precisely what he mentioned. So then high knowledge indicating trade, indicating computer, and then a system of the dragon. Because the dragon was also included during this time of the restoration period, because the objective of the Creator, he wants to show himself as generous, as wise, as the true living Creator, providing then materials, providing a way of finances so people can do their rebuilding, and then later they can evaluate on a holy scales. What does it mean, holy scales? Do we not read from the holy instructions? The Creator does not like lying scales. He wants us to become then the measurers of His favor. He's favoring His people by returning of the holy cities. He's favoring the Gentiles via the refurbishment. So then when they receive what is required for rebuilding, they will understand the Creator mightily working amongst His people and amongst the Gentiles. So then they will understand what is going to be like in the new government when this earth then is refurbished. Try to understand, we are speaking of the refurbishment of the holy cities, the refurbishment of the kingdoms and nations of this world, indicating what's going to be like the new refurbishment when the new government then is available. So then what should be done? The objective is Dragon Mart. Not above, not below at the moment when speaking of Gentile level. Dragon Mart. This is it. Dragon Mart. Dragon Mart then in Dubai. Dragon Mart then in Cancun. Dragon Mart then in Australia. Dragon Mart then in South America. Brazil. Dragon Mart then in Canada, northern area. Dragon Mart in India. Dragon Mart then Africa. The dragon must establish his trading posts. When he does, then you find much satisfaction and understanding. Then comes the system of the dragon via computer. Then the dragon establishes himself as trading posts around the world. Then you find the system, the internet system, directly related with the dragon, under the control of the dragon. Every transaction, every financial transaction must be under the authority of the dragon, and there is no exception. As the world was scoundrelized and absolutely involved with deceit for more than 1,000 years. It is truly technical understanding 1,000 years, but if you do the mathematical calculation, it's a bit more of 1,000 years. But the point is not the number, the point is the content. Try to understand, we are speaking of deceit. The world is absolutely caught in deceit. How many people can understand the holy cities are returning? How many people can understand Hebrews, where then Hanan was then writing and recording in the first holy city and returning to the city? He makes many references of cities and the cities. Then you find Yehuda, known as Jude but doesn't exist, is Yehuda, mentioning of the people on their way to form another holy city. How many people in this planet understand the holy cities must return? So then, when you understand the discrepancy from what is true versus what is not true, you understand the world was caught in deceit. So much so that then Shaliach Shaul mentioned they would concoct for themselves teachers, and they would teach another Messiah, another way of salvation, and they would then gorge themselves with lies and schemes. And the world is absolutely repleted with it. But the focus is then Dragon Mart. The physical area of the trading posts of the dragon must be established. There is no excuse, there is no going around. So then after then, the geographical areas of the dragon then is established. Then goes the time for the computer dragon. His system, his monetary system, becomes then a decentralized monetary system. The reason why we were giving, for instance, the Bitcoin system or then other systems related with decentralized virtual monetary systems were given thus far, indicating what the dragon system must be. So then the objective is then Dragon Mart. Dragon Mart at the moment must be around the world, as many places where he thinks must be. Then the Dragon Mart via online. Every computer, every site, every transaction must be directed, linked with the dragon. No exception. No exception. When the spiritual release of the dragon comes for trade via computer, every person must be then linked with the dragon. At the moment, the spirit of the dragon is not available for every person. Mostly in the Asiatic areas you find then the dragon very diligently working. But in the West you don't find, sometimes in Europe you don't find. But the spirit of the dragon must be then made available throughout the world. So then when the Messiah was explaining then, later, he was explaining from a viewpoint where then the geographical areas of trade around the world were established. He was explaining from a viewpoint where then both sticks of authority were already granted. Then the system via computer was already implemented, and the spirit of the dragon very vivid around the world. Then the Messiah spoke from this point in time in the future, or then the golden time of trade in the world. Then you find the prostitute over there. Then you have to understand the Babylonian system versus the dragon system. You have to understand the nations related with the Babylonian system versus the dragon. You have to understand what goes on amongst the Gentiles and then nations then preparing themselves for the combat of the end. But this is truly future. As long as we understand the Gentile level, they have an objective. The objective is Dragon Mart. None other than Dragon Mart. This is what the Creator expects from those who are being enlightened. It is obvious. He himself spoke in his holy instructions. So then, obviously, during this G20 visit in the Soviet Union, then they regained the talks of the monetary system of the BRICS. It is the starting point of the decentralized monetary virtual market for usage in the very near future. We've got roughly 20 years left only of this age. 20 years is the very most. Then the prophecies related with the Gentiles then are completed. This age must be closed, and then we can read the post-autumn feast recordings, such as then the new capital of the world when it's refurbished, Ezekiel. Then you find in Yeshayahu 65th and 66th chapter, post-autumn feast. You find the Messiah speaking in the later chapters of Galah or Revelation than the post-autumn feast. These are the objectives. There is no other. There is no more nations trying to come together and come up with their own schemes. As it was explained before, after 09 is what nations should not do. Because any schemes they do then returns to them. Because the Messiah was giving an example, for instance, of judgment. But his understanding of judgment was very broad. At the moment when the Messiah was speaking during the completion of the spring feast was purely related with his people. But then the Messiah, when he was explaining later, in many other sections, then the Messiah included the Gentiles. But the principle remains the same for both. What is then the objective understanding tabernacling? From the viewpoint of salvation. What is the objective related with the Gentiles? They are the testifiers of the Messiah, and both of them must produce fruit. If they scheme against the holy instructions, returns to them, because the layers must remain intact. That's why then the holy instructions must be filtered. There are lots of takanotes around and people are confused. Those takanotes must be removed, and the original state of the holy instructions, every layer perfectly must be then layered together as per Yohanan when he did this work in the first holy city. So then the objective is then Dragon Mart. There is no other conversation other than Dragon Mart. The world is in a time where then we find ourselves during the time of the dragon. Because we do not have tabernacling yet set per instructions on the land of Cush, per the instructions of Yirmiyahu the prophet, then when comes from heaven the order, the dragon is the second. And he rules the earth. Outside of tabernacling, dragon, then he rules the earth. Because we are speaking of Gentile level. Tabernacling is not established yet. The principles are returning. The layerings are returning. The holy instructions must be filtered. Takanotes must be removed. Masi must be removed. Until only the perfection of the holy instructions then is established. As far as Gentile level, anywhere on the planet, the dragon rules. Any place where there is trade, the dragon must be included. The dragon is precision, Dragon Mart. The sign of the dragon is Dragon Mart, must be established. This means around the world trading posts such as Dubai, such as Cancun, then later Australia, then later maybe Brazil, South America, then you find North America, Canada, and then also India, and then obviously Africa. Then the dragon, besides other trading posts he thinks should be implemented, then comes the system. Then the entire world is 100% linked with the dragon, and they are busy refurbishing themselves. Because the Creator in his mind, he wants to refurbish this world. Then the coming of the Jerusalem from heaven, the heavenly Jerusalem, making the capital of the world, then the Creator himself then rules in his rightful place. And then the rest of us get busy, obviously. Please stay tuned, much more coming up.